Section 15 of Shadowland, October 1919. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Donald Warren. Shadowland, October 1919, by Various. The Fighting Actors of the A.E.F. by John Hopkins. Two bodies of workers came through the fire and blood test of the World War with flying colors, the Salvation Army and the players. The achievements of the Salvation Army are now a matter of history. This article is an effort to record something of the activities of the actor in one field of war work, keeping up the morale of his brothers on the firing line. The generosity and the self-sacrifice of the player in times of need have always asserted themselves. The players in this country, for instance, did a tremendous work in putting over the various Liberty loan drives and war saving stamp campaigns. They fought shoulder to shoulder behind the fighting men, but in this limited space we have only time to deal with the actors who fought with the soldiers. It was natural that the vast American expeditionary forces should produce a number of acting companies, just as it produces its individual baseball and football teams. The first of these dramatic organizations, and the only one officially recognized, was the Argonne Players, organized in the Lorraine sector in July 1918. These players made history. The Argonne Players first numbered 20 players. The first performance was given on the 4th of July. From that day, the Argonne Players became a growing and advancing organization, never losing its identity. The actors were not permitted to devote their whole time to entertaining their brothers, nor did they desire to, for a bigger work was on. They played during their out-of-the-line intervals, returning to their various regiments when their units moved back to the fighting zone. The Argonne Players were organized from men of the 77th Metropolitan Division, made up largely of New York City men. The personnel of the division naturally numbered many players, and as the Argonne Players grew, they came to include Percy Helton, the well-known juvenile actor, Jack Waldron, a comedian and dancer, Howard Greer, who designed all the scenery, posters, and costumes, Fred Roth and Alfred Dubin, who wrote the books and lyrics of the productions, Stuart Sage, Henry Cahill, Mario Rodolfi, and others. The initial performance, given on the 4th of July, was a minstrel show presented in the Municipal Theater at Baccarat in the Vosges. The theater was located some 12 kilometers from the fighting line, and the audience included a visiting French general and 15,000 doughboys. From that opening performance, the Argonne Players went through a series of thrilling experiences absolutely unlike those ever encountered by a body of actors. They played in all sorts of places: quiet vineyards far from the front, in shell-shattered chateaus, in wrecked barns under fire, and in the open air under camouflaged trees. Many times shells burst a few feet away from their impromptu stage, but the players came through unscathed. One shell might have wiped out the whole cast. Just one member lost his life, David Hochstein, the violinist. His death occurred in the trenches under fire. The Argonne Players developed a style of performance all their own. They created a revue which they termed the Amex Revue, comprising a succession of various acts. This was unlike the musical comedies with choruses and the typical numbers given by the various other American acting units, which were created later and at total variance with the British pantomime performances. The Argonne Players encountered many colorful experiences. Once early in October 1918, while playing on the edge of the Argonne Wood, in a ruined cathedral minus a roof, a flock of enemy bombing planes suddenly appeared overhead. The Boche airmen noticed the lights of the performance and began dropping explosives. Some of these fell 50 feet away, but the players kept on with their roles, although the officer ordered the lights flashed out. The Argonne Players boasted the fact that the Germans never once held up a performance. Sometimes, however, they were forced to play in gas masks. Earlier in 1918, in August to be exact, the Argonne Players went through another bombing experience while giving their review in the Vasa sector on the grounds of a chateau formerly occupied by the German Crown Prince. Hidden by camouflage trees, they kept on with their review. Here they utilized the Crown Prince's own piano, a small walnut instrument inlaid with gold, which they later took back to America with them. It was about the time of the Chateau Thierry drive that the players began to enlarge their company and develop their review along broader lines. All this time they had been encountering tremendous difficulties in building scenery. They had found it impossible to get either canvas or dyes. This taxed their Yankee ingenuity for a time, but they soon had a scenic equipment built from captured burlap, which they painted in futuristic style from pigments made of crushed fruits. The review had begun to be talked about all along the American line by this time, and during the Chateau Thierry drive, they moved their division down into the Argonne forest. The officers realized that their men needed recreation during the tremendous days of the drive, and the Argonne players were stationed in a barn at Florent, where the review ran for 30 days. All the men coming out of the front lines passed through Florent on their way back to the rest sections, and all the replacement men moved up through the town, so thousands of doughboys watched the show during this trying period. The Amex review developed some odd features. Harry Cahill, a soldier, was discovered to be a remarkable feminine impersonator, although he had never done this sort of work before. Paris went wild later over Cahill, and the members of the American colony purchased costumes for him of Lucille. Another favorite act was an emotional playlet done by Helton and Sage. A little later, the Americans captured a big German theater in the forest, a theater which apparently had been used by the Huns as an amusement center. It was equipped with a bathing pool, a cinema theater, and bowling alleys, and there the Argonne players enjoyed a luxurious run of 3 days. It was at this theater that Alexander Wolcott, a New York dramatic critic, while serving in France, ran across them. Wolcott sent back an interesting article about them, centering upon the picturesque way in which the non-temperamental actors in khaki cooked their dinner upon the stage after the performance, and how, rolling up in blankets among the scenery, they peacefully went to sleep. During the last 3 nights of the war, before the armistice came, the players were near the Luxembourg border, where they were under a terrific fire from the retreating Huns. After the end of hostilities, the players began what developed almost into a tour of France. They played at many railroad centers for incoming and outgoing soldiers. Meanwhile, the YMCA outfits, the Salvation Army, workers, and the war correspondents had carried word back to Paris of their unusual entertainment, and they were brought to the new Théâtre des Champs-Élysées late in November, when for 3 nights they played to a capacity and turned some 18,000 away. One other interesting after-the-war experiences was a performance giving at the big military hospital at Savernay, where they played in a theater seating 3,000. This theater was built and managed by Schuyler Ladd, another American actor. In December 1918, they gave a performance for Margaret Wilson, daughter of the President. She cabled to her father to be sure to see them upon his arrival, and on January 18, 1919, they played before the presidential party at the Théâtre des Champs-Élysées. It was a brilliant audience, numbering, aside from President and Mrs. Wilson, Marshal Foch, Lloyd George, and many diplomats and officers. Their audience gave their Amex review of 1918 a thunderous reception. Moreover, it was the first and only performance of its kind ever given before an American president. Between this date and their performance before Miss Wilson, they had toured extensively, appearing at the headquarters at Tours, in Bordeaux, and the seaport towns. After the presidential performance, they played all the rest areas in France for the entertainment of the American lads. During all this time, their audiences had consisted solely of soldiers, except at the presidential performance, although a few French and British had watched the performance as guests. The Argonne players had planned to visit Monte Carlo, Nice, London, and several English cities, but orders came for them to return to America to aid the Fifth Liberty Loan Drive. Once in New York, their plans were again shifted, and after appearing for 2 New York engagements, they were disbanded. Before sailing from France, General Pershing complimented them on their work, at the same time congratulating the players upon their coolness under fire. They sailed for home on April 17th, arrived on April 25th, having entertained the officers and soldiers during the trip over via the Mount Vernon, and after their appearances at the Manhattan and Lexington opera houses, They disbanded on May 31st, 1919, having existed as a unit for 11 months. Dozens of other acting companies appeared during this time, but the Argonne Players were the only organization authorized by the War Department as a recognized unit. During most of their time, they were under the command of Lieutenant Warren Diefendorf. In the 11 months, they played to 1 million men, sometimes giving 10 performances a day. Once they played from 8 o'clock in the morning to 4 o'clock the next. They traveled by motor truck, actors, scenery, and costumes being transported in the truck, an airplane trailer carrying the props. Sometimes they gave their review right on the truck, with automobile lights as footlights. Aside from the loss of David Hochstein, Howard Greer and Fred Rath were wounded in action. Percy Helton was cited for bravery on the battlefield, so it is clear that the fighting actors did their bit both in and back of the line. Now the Argonne Players are a memory, but the days when they performed at the front, with shells dropping all about them, aren't likely to be forgotten by the actors themselves or the doughboys who found relief and relaxation in their work. End of section 15.